Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Richard Nixon Presidential Library and Museum. I'm Bill Barabald, president of the Richard Nixon Foundation. Thank you for joining us today for this most solemn of remembrances. We are joined by a number of veterans in the audience, and those that have served, would you stand up? And we'd like to recognize and thank you. Thank you for your service. It's my pleasure to now introduce Craig Clements. Craig has spent his entire life serving others and totally involving and investing himself in the causes in which he most deeply believes. He is the chairman of the board of the Iwo Jima Monument Camp Pendleton and a member of the National Business Honor Society, the Susan Komen Foundation, the Christopher and Dana Reeves Foundation, the Lincoln Club of Orange County, and the Richard Nixon Foundation, proudly. Craig enlisted in the Army in 1967 during the height of the Vietnam War and later played football professionally in the NFL. Craig is a true champion of all things Nixon. It is my pleasure to welcome him here today.
Good afternoon. You may be wondering why I am introducing Scott Huesing. I'll take a minute to tell you. I'm on the President's Council here with the Nixon Foundation, and I volunteered to do whatever they want me to do. So they asked me to introduce Scott, and I said I'd be more than happy to. I'm also on the board of directors of Camp Pendleton Armed Services YMCA, and I spend at least a day a week at the School of Infantry. I was born and raised in South Central Los Angeles. I graduated from Compton Community College, so I'm from the hood. It took me 5 years to obtain my associate degree from Compton Community College. I actually thought it was a 4-year school. When I went to Compton, I majored in fraternity, women, and beer. And it was a great 5 years. I also played football. In my freshman year, I broke my neck in our 7th game of the season. Full lights and siren to the hospital. I was paralyzed from the neck down. I was a quadriplegic. When I was lying there with nothing moving, you make a lot of promises to God. Big guy, if you get me out of this one, I promise, I promise, I promise. 2 days later, my toes started to move, then my fingers, and then everything else. After 3 months in a neck brace, they said I'm fine, and the probability of reoccurrence was the same as the first time. I had crushed 2 vertebrae in my neck, but they had pulled themselves back together naturally. I wake up every morning to fulfill these promises. I wake up every morning at 0500 at full speed. Natasha and Joy can confirm that I'm kind of a lot to handle. So I went back to school then and continued my major of girls and beer. I flunked out of Compton College in 1967 and was drafted into the Army. I went in the 7th Infantry at Fort Ord, California. I had one older brother already in the Army and another in the Air Force. I washed out of basic due to my football injuries, and I then went back to school and back to playing football. I know, who does that after a broken neck? I have no explanation except that girls like football players better. I transferred to Cal State University Northridge on a football scholarship with my 130 college units. 2 years later, I was All-League, All-Coast, All-American, and Team Most Valuable Player. I was also Beta Gamma Sigma National Business Honor Society with straight A's. Everybody deserves a second chance. After I graduated the next season, I opened the year on the kickoff squad of the Houston Oilers. I played linebacker in our opening game against the Gale Sayers, Dick Butkus-led Chicago Bears before a packed, screaming 65,000 fans in a new Astrodome. I wasn't in Kansas anymore. I'd come a long way from my hospital bed in Compton. I played linebacker, but I'm really a nice guy. Don't believe all those linebacker stories. After the NFL, I finished my computer science degree, got a master's in math, and started as an actuary. I'm really a nerd at heart. I then went into the insurance business, made more money than I can ever spend, retired a couple years ago. I have 3 children and 10 grandchildren. I believe it's not important what you become. What's important is what your children become. That's also when I joined the board of directors of Camp Pendleton Armed Services YMCA and started giving back. I became close with Camp Pendleton and our charity. I have a particular affinity with the School of Infantry. I am there every Wednesday as we graduate 400 Marines. We feed them hot dogs and chili and then send them into harm's way. Every Wednesday, 400 Marines every Wednesday 400 Marines. I've told you a bit about myself so you'll understand why I believe Scott and I have some similarities. Believe me, Scott wakes up every morning at full speed. I got his book on Saturday, and on Sunday I sat in quiet solitude at the beach all day and read the book. Every word, cover to cover. Impressive, impressive. These men, and now women, put their lives on the line so my children and grandchildren don't have to. I love these guys. Read the book. Scott and others volunteer to go defend our freedom and way of life. Scott is a proven combat veteran and U.S. Marine infantry officer. He led one of the most distinguished units in the history of modern urban warfare. Scott is a retired USMC infantry major with over 24 years of service. His career spanned 10 deployments, and he conducted operations in over 60 countries worldwide. During his deployments in Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Horn of Africa, he planned and led over 100 combat missions under some of the most austere and challenging conditions. He had the privilege to command Echo Company, 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines. Scott is also executive director of Save the Brave, a charity supporting veterans dealing with PTSD. A quote from Scott: "In war, destruction is everywhere. It eats everything around you, and sometimes it eats you." He battled in a war where the front line was everywhere, a war without rules, marked by unrelenting chaos and ruthless, elusive enemy. Through it all, Hussein and his men were bound together by brotherhood and honor, and the dangers they faced every day. Echo in Ramadi is an exhilarating, unforgettable account of war at its sharpest edge, and of the unbreakable bonds formed in the chaos of war among the Marines who fought and died there. Jimmy Doolittle said it best. General Jimmy Doolittle said it best. There's nothing stronger than the heart of a volunteer. Scott is a volunteer. Scott is also a hero. Every once in a while in life, you meet special people, people of character, people that don't talk, they just do, people that make your life better, freer, safer. And sometimes you never meet them. But today you have the opportunity to meet one. It gives me great pleasure and honor to introduce Scott Huesing.
Well, thank you all very much to Bill and Craig. And right before, when we met, Craig asked me about the introduction, and I said, always more you, less me. And he didn't let me down, so thank you in that regard. It's always better that way. I'm very honored to be a part of this program, this day. And for the second week in a row, I've had to follow Herschel Woody Williams. And that's a tough bill to follow. But we're both Marines, and after I spoke last weekend in Boston to help wounded vets during the Boston Wounded Vet Run, Chad, his grandson, remarked to me, and he says, "What did you like most about the day?" And I said, well, it had to be Woody's speech, but it wasn't the words that he spoke that struck me. It was being there in the chute, ready to walk on stage after Woody and the governor of Massachusetts and an Olympic gold medalist and all these national heroes. And I stood and I looked at Woody at 95 years old. And as Andrew Biggio announced his name, I saw his short, stocky frame just kind of rise up a little bit more, and he marched directly onto that stage. And that was the best part of Woody's speech for me. And every time that I'm honored to speak in front of such prestigious crowds, I also see a lot of trends that are not only unique to those who served in the military, but I think Marines especially. And Craig hit on a few of those during the introduction. So for those of you that don't know much about me, I started off as a young enlisted Marine from Waukegan, Illinois. It's a far north suburb of Chicago. And much like many who joined the military and the Marines especially, I led a young, unsupervised childhood during high school. I got in more than my share of fights. I also played sports. I also drank underage. I also ran from the cops. I also got caught by the cops. I took a lot of risks, and that was what I was used to. And that's what brought me into this brotherhood, this amazing fraternity and sorority of brothers and sisters. And when you get lured into the Marine Corps or the Army, you see these placards and the colors and these Marines who seem larger than life. And they appeared to me as this gigantic group of risk takers. And I thought to myself, these guys are a perfect fit. I couldn't have found a better place to not only challenge me, but also hone me and mentor me. And they did that in full. But after I served in Desert Shield and Desert Storm, I soon found the error of my ways and wanted to get into college education after barely squeaking out of high school with a stellar 1.24 GPA. I don't even know if that was graduating. Craig, give me a ruling on this. Maybe they're just like, Scott, yes, you can join the Marines. And they let me go. But I did much better in college and graduated in 3 years. And I always say that because it's a testament to what our military gives us and the discipline that it gives its young men and women to treat life as a mission and really drive purpose into you, which is absolutely what it did for me. After I got my commission after graduating college, I was a young lieutenant, served in all the right billets of responsibility and leadership, and some 15 years later, I was thrust into the bloody streets of Ramadi, Iraq, which is where my story takes place. But I don't really want to talk about the story because you'll have a chance to read it, hopefully, and it's a magnificent story about some magnificent bastards who I served along. And we call ourselves that proudly because that's our battalion call sign in 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines. And it's a call sign that was earned in battle in Vietnam that we carry proudly through our traditions. And I think we've seen many of those today throughout the generations you've already heard speak. Generations like our greatest generation, or baby boomers, or Gen Xers. And you saw today, standing there behind Woody, are millennials, the future and the current generation who are out there today defending our nation. They're the ones fighting in Iraq. They're the ones fighting in Afghanistan, these soft snowflakes that say have not had it so hard, but are still doing the things to carry this mantle of success forward for this great nation. And I think that's remarkable. And I always stand behind them. Because for me, the school of leadership that I went through was gained from experience and listening to those around me. And from listening to great leaders like Woody, like Major General Livingston and Bill Weiss. These guys who were battle-tested but knew that you have to be hard on the Marines. But there's also words that they don't teach us in the textbooks that professional warriors attend. And those are words like love and compassion and leadership. And if I heard them once, I heard them a dozen times, as those two Marines spoke earlier today. And those are the words that real leaders subscribe to, because those were the words that allowed us not only to fight and win, but also survive in the deadliest city in 2006 in Ramadi, Iraq. And as we continued to fight and win, we also suffered loss. And there's no school that can teach you how to deal with that either. To train your Marines for that type of loss isn't something they give you a class in. It is absolutely something that never comes easy when you have to make a phone call to the mother of a young Marine who minutes later literally fought beside you and died helping protect his fellow Marines. There's no class for that. And it's through that brotherhood and that power of human connection that we're really able to get through that and to make a difference in each other's lives. And I'm surrounded by that, not only in organizations like this at the Nixon Foundation, but through our Gold Star families, through the Marines, through our Army brothers who fought alongside of us. And that power of human connection, I think, is what really sustains us. It certainly helped us not only as we fought and won in Ramadi, but it still sustains me to this day, this power of human connection and being able to understand not only that loss of the brothers and sisters that we endured on the battlefield, but how we heal through that. And we have done that, and we continue to do that through great organizations. And this is one of them. And I know oftentimes people talk about the heroics and the great feats that we do in battle. And most certainly, as Woody mentioned earlier, there's men greater than I that have ever stood on this stage or at this distinguished institution speaking. I'm no hero. And the real heroes are the ones we honor and memorialize on this day and every day, because every day is Memorial Day for us. There's not a day goes by that we don't remember them. And I think that being able to share their stories and being able to remember their legacy is an important thing, because one of the other things that I've learned along my journey is that real leadership is about understanding yourself. It's about listening to those you're privileged to lead. And then at the end of it all, through age and experience, and comes this wisdom. And many of you here can understand that. And I've been gifted with that to a degree, to understand that part of leadership means that you do it for a lifetime. And my leadership didn't stop when I left Ramadi. It certainly didn't stop when I left the Marine Corps in 2013. I still feel very honored to lead the families and the Marines and the soldiers that I was honored to lead in combat, in every unit for that matter. It's something that you're privileged to do. And you don't often seek it, but it's also very gratifying to know that you're cared for as a leader. They tell us never to say that in public. But I think that's where the real importance comes, where you have these young Marines who grew up so fast. They're all 30 years old now, and if I've gotten one, I've gotten hundreds of requests and letters of recommendation for grad school or to join the police force. And to know that they still see me as their leader means more to me than anything, because it's truly my honor to do that. But to do that, I also had to give of myself. And that's not an easy thing to do, to show that you're human and to show that along life you slip and you fall. And that's life. It's slippery. And you lose traction sometimes, and you'll feel it coming. That ground beneath you kind of shakes a little bit. And Marines especially think they're impervious to the effects of gravity, and they'll never fall. But trust me, they will. And real leadership is understanding that although you may have fallen, you get back up. And it's not about understanding so you don't fall on your back again, but making sure that those who follow don't fall down. And you identify those slippery areas on the road ahead of you to take care of those you lead. So being able to share a part of yourself and to share your humility and your wins and losses and those failures and those slippery points in life is vital to really being a lifelong leader, because it's not a 9-to-5 job. And making those admissions of humility and reluctance and vulnerability, I think President Nixon found that out as well, as he identified what he did and all of the challenges in his office. And again, we oftentimes think that the great deeds are the ones that we have to pay most attention to, but it's those small moments in life when people scrape themselves apart and share that humility, as Nixon did, that he felt that he had let down the American people by making mistakes of the heart instead of the mind. And to be able to do that in that type of office is something I found very remarkable as a leader, as the one leader that is responsible for an entire nation. To me, that's incomprehensible. To me, standing here being able to talk at the Nixon Foundation is incomprehensible, to be quite honest. To be surrounded by heroes that I grew up with, and I think of who that 19-year-old Lance Corporal was some 30 years ago now, is remarkable to me, that I'm now in a position where I'm honored to be surrounded by these legends of my Marine Corps and our military and our political leaders and our veteran supporters and these families and all of you here today. Because when I was younger, I used to wonder about what is war all about, and the shiny medals and the ribbons and the parades. And I used to think that that was really the measure of one's success, especially as a young 19-year-old Lance Corporal. But 15 years later, and after several combat deployments, when I fought alongside my men and women, at times in the streets of Ramadi, none of that meant much to me, because all I really cared about was bringing my Marines home alive. And even though I'd seen more than my share of combat, Ramadi in 2006 would really redefine what fighting meant to the Marines, to me. Because to be exposed to that type of kinetic environment where it's fighting day in and day out, house to house, street to street, it's really the most intense circumstance you can ever imagine. And it took me those years of age and wisdom and experience to realize that I had gone through all this before with multiple combat deployments, and I was now a 35-year-old captain. And it was hard for me at times to put myself in the place of that 18, 19-year-old Lance Corporal and understand how they must be dealing with that type of pressure. And that's something that I really didn't understand for a long time. And again, maybe it took writing a book, and maybe it took exposing myself, but really what it took was listening to my Marines and understanding, after all of the interviews and all of the pain that they shared with me and the families, and talking to them as we were able to share this story. I think that that is what came out of it, is an understanding that it's all right to be human. And when my Marines and the families were able to share that with me, I think it was an important part. So today, on Memorial Day, I think it's important we realize that we're here again to honor those that we lost. But General Patton said it best, is that it's foolish to mourn the dead that we lost. Instead, we should be grateful and thank God that such men lived. And I truly believe that, because they're not stories of sadness, they're stories of brightness. These Gold Star families are still here for us. They're not these shrouded widows or dour moms and dads. Yes, they suffer, but they also understand that we suffer as well, and we understand their loss. And they may not have wanted us, but they got 200 adopted sons out of the deal. And we're always there for each other, and it's a remarkable connection. And I'll share one short story with you that was extremely impactful to me, because that's one thing as a leader you don't often see, is the impact you make. And sometimes it takes 10 years or 20 years or 50 years to understand that impact you've made in other people's lives. And I received that recently in an email from Staff Sergeant Phil Morehouse, U.S. Army, Task Force 19 Infantry, when he wrote, "Dear Sir, I'm probably pretty sure that you don't even remember me. I was a staff sergeant in the admin shop with Task Force 19 Infantry, and I was there the night the call came across the radio. When Corporal Libby was shot. And I ran across the street on Route Michigan to the battalion aid station at the combat outpost. And I stood there, and I watched your convoy roll in through the maze of chem lights. And I remember the dust cloud around the vehicles. I remember the sound of the brakes. And I remember your Marines carrying Corporal Libby. I remember the look on their faces. I remember the look on your face. I remember every single step that you took. And I haven't thought about those things in 12 years until I read your book." And he goes on in the email, "But But he finishes with something very important, and it was simple. He said, yes, we definitely made a difference. So as a kid that grew up in the far north suburbs of Chicago, running from the cops and getting in more than a share of trouble, to getting an education and getting the opportunity to be surrounded by so many great people and having the privilege to lead so many amazing people and to hear his words and to read Phil Morehouse's words and to see that reflection of my leadership. As I was standing there in the moment, is something remarkable to know that you've made an impact. And that was never clearer than when I read Phil's words, and I'm very grateful to his and the hundreds of others that I've received, and I share that with you because this is Military Appreciation Month, and today is Memorial Day. And I want everybody to just remember those who gave the ultimate sacrifice and take time to be happy that such brave men and women lived, because that is really what it's all about. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
He is author of Echo in Ramadi. He has agreed to sign this book after we get through the program. We're going to take some questions right now. If you would like to ask Scott one, go ahead and raise your hand. Our first question is back here. I know we also have some questions coming from Facebook. This is live right now.
Great.
So you've got an international audience.
Again, no pressure, right?
Yeah, thanks. I was wondering if you could just give us a brief outline of the Battle of Ramadi. I know it was very significant, but can you tell us why it was so significant?
Yeah, why was Ramadi such a significant battle? And I was asked walking in here, why did I write this book? And it was because I didn't want the Battle of Ramadi to fall under the shadows of other significant battles during this long war that's been going on, and fall under the shadows of the battles of Fallujah or Baghdad or in Helmand Province in Afghanistan. So in 2006 and leading up to that, my battalion, 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, fought in Ramadi in 2004 in what we call the First Battle of Ramadi. So we handed it back over the course of 2 years, and there was this sine wave of wins and losses and political failures and infrastructural failures on the Iraqi government's part, and probably some on the U.S. So in 2006, President George W. Bush and General Dave Petraeus ordered the surge strategy, which some of you may remember in mainstream media. It was flooding the battle space with additional tens of thousands of troops, and we were part of that. The 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit went in because up until that point, during this, what I define as a 2-year battle for Ramadi, which was the capital of Al-Anbar Province, key terrain, a key city that was filled with 300,000 people, by the way, and the Euphrates River cutting east to west, that looked like it had been standing at point blank of a double-barrel shotgun for 10 years, time and again, riddled with bullet holes and covered in a layer of gray dust, which was appropriate since it was called Ramadi, the Gray City. Till that point, we'd been playing this giant game of whack-a-mole across the entire country. We would constantly hammer down the insurgents in cities like Baghdad, Tikrit, Najaf, and then they'd pop back up. But when we ordered the surge strategy and we flooded the battle space, our area of responsibility was Ramadi, because that's where the insurgents wanted to fight. That's where they'd drawn the line in the sand, and that's where we fought, and that's where they lost. And I make no bones about that, because we oftentimes never get a clear-cut definition. They say, hey, well, what was winning? What was losing? Well, if it was killing bad guys, we were lighting up the scoreboard. It was the Super Bowl of the infantry for us in 2006. My Marines were engaged 5-6 times a day in firefights lasting up to 5 hours. Every single day, street to street, house to house, immersed in this city of 300,000 people that we were there to protect as well. So that was the significance. If Ramadi fell, we risked losing the entire province of Al-Anbar. And that's General James Mattis talking. That was his quote. That was his concern as he was leading his men up in cities like Fallujah and Baghdad and other parts. So to give Ramadi back in 06 and 07 would have been a massive failure. But, again, not being perfect students of history, I think none of us need a crystal ball to realize that we turn back our history dials, what city ISIS took hold of after the U.S. pulled out, and that was Ramadi. And they took hold, and we've been struggling ever since, but we're still there. And I've got news for anyone that doesn't report it, is we're still winning. I talk to the Marines. I'm still very connected to those on the ground and those that continue to rotate back. Does that answer your question? Thanks.
The next one, like I said, we've got Facebook Live streaming this. You serve to protect our Constitution. How do you feel when people want to attack our president on a personal level and refuse to see his accomplishments?
Could you repeat it?
You serve to protect our Constitution. How do you feel when people want to attack our president on a personal level and refuse to see his accomplishments?
Well, I serve to protect the Constitution. I serve now as a patriot and fellow American. At the time in 2006, we weren't fighting politics. We weren't fighting policy. We most certainly weren't fighting strategy. We were fighting the enemy. And as Craig alluded to, it was a faceless, brutal enemy that wore no uniform, that blended in amongst the people, and was hell-bent on doing nothing more than getting their hateful ideology across through murder and kidnapping, rape, intimidation, beheadings. And these aren't things that I say to be cavalier. These are things that are not urban legend. These are things that happened and things that I witnessed, things that we as Marines can't unsee. When we operate in a place like Ramadi, the worst that humanity has to offer. So when other people make criticisms about our president, my first question is, have you served? Have you served your nation? Have you served others? Have you written? Have you given of yourself? Because if you don't ever want to be criticized, don't do anything. Don't ever write anything. Don't ever stand on a stage in front of hundreds of strangers and share your story, because guaranteed you'll never suffer criticism. And I think that whether it's this administration or any administration, those that are willing to serve, especially in the highest office, I think they're pretty well tested, and I think they're pretty mettled to the slings and arrows that critics pose. And I don't think any of us that have fought and that have lost and that have sacrificed ever look in our crystal balls and say, woe is me. Everything we did in Iraq or Afghanistan is for naught. We did it to fight for each other. We did it for our country, and we still do it to this day. We don't do it for politicians. We do it for each other, and we do it for our families. That's why we fight.